foolish mortals.
Hello there. Are you insane? Get out of here!
Remain seated with your seatbelt fastened.
Right, off you go.
Welcome to Average Joe Orlando. Hello and welcome to Average Joe Orlando, reporting for KMV Travel. I'm your host, Average Joe, and today we are going to be discussing the history of the icons at Halloween Horror Nights. Now, Halloween Horror Nights is an event at most of the Universal parks around the world. Today we're going to mainly be discussing Universal Orlando's event, as that is the largest and also features most of the icons. Now, the icons are the mascot of the event, if you will, and they are the one that kind of bring the event to life. However, they have a rich history, and there is a lot of things not known about them. So today, let's deep dive and discuss them. Now, Halloween Horror Nights started in 1991 at Universal Orlando Resort. That first year, it was only 3 nights, and it was called Fright Nights. It didn't switch over to the name Halloween Horror Nights to the next year. Now, the event has grown to over 40 nights and features 10 haunted houses, 5 scare zones, and the event even starts in August, and it doesn't wrap up until early November. This episode of Average Joe Orlando is sponsored by KMV Travel, a travel agency that helps families of all shapes and sizes plan personalized vacations and create unforgettable memories. No matter where you're traveling, to your favorite theme park, aboard a cruise, on an all-inclusive getaway, or beyond, the dedicated advisors at KMV Travel will provide personalized travel guidance and unmatched service at no additional cost to you. To learn more and start planning your vacation with expert guidance, visit kmvtravel.com/Joe. Now let's start at the beginning. Halloween Horror Nights 1991, or as I mentioned earlier, it was called Fright Nights for the first year. Now they didn't have an official icon. They basically had Beetlejuice and the Universal Monsters overseeing those 3 nights of the event, the unofficial host, if you will, or the ghost host with the most, as he's known. Now, they don't always need or have an icon. You'll see as we go through the years leading up to this year, not every year has an icon or a mascot, and they didn't start actually to Halloween Horror Nights 10 with an original. That is when the Universal Creative Team, that is the team that creates all the rides, shows, entertainment, and comes up with all these great ideas. That's when they came up with their own original icon and kind of stopped using ones that are more well-known and creating ones with a rich history that tie together and are the ones that we know today. But for the first year, 1991, Beetlejuice and the Universal Monsters. But then we're going to move on to year 2 through 4. They did not have an icon. They kind of let the event speak for itself. That's when it transformed into Halloween Horror Nights from Fright Nights. Halloween Horror Nights 5, they did bring an icon. However, that was the Crypt Keeper. So you might remember the Crypt Keeper, if I'm dating myself, from Tales from the Crypt show, and they were the icon that year. Halloween Horror Nights 6, 7, and 8 did not feature an icon once again. We didn't see one again until 9, and that featured The Mummy, which tied back to the Mummy film, which, if you go to Universal, you know that ride well and why you need to get your cup of coffee. Now, Halloween Horror Nights 10, now this is when our story begins, and that is when we saw Jack the Clown for the first time, the serial killer clown. Now, he did start off with a backstory, and it kind of grew as time went on. We learned that he worked for Dr. Oddfellow's circus, and we heard about this character. We heard about Dr. Oddfellow. However, we don't actually even see Dr. Oddfellow as a icon until Halloween Horror Nights 32. So quite a long time until we actually get the payoff for that story and even learn more. So it's one of these things that 20 years in the making, the story keeps developing and keeps growing. But Jack is a sadistic killer clown and runs the carnival show, as you will, and is a serial killer and is out for revenge. Now, Halloween Horror Nights 11 was supposed to actually feature a new character, Eddie. Eddie is Jack's brother, and he leads a gang of chainsaws. However, Halloween Horror Nights 11 took place in 2001, and right after the events of 9/11, they decided to downplay more of the gore of that event and change it up a little bit. So last-minute change, they changed the event to call Jack's Back and featured Jack the Clown again instead of Eddie, and kind of downplayed a lot of the things. They changed a lot of the things to more ooze and slime instead of blood, and did a little bit of changing at that last minute. So Eddie kind of became a character that people heard of, was starting to be featured in the marketing, but actually doesn't ever see the light of day until later on, which we will definitely get to. The following year, Halloween Horror Nights 12, the icon was the Caretaker. So the first time that we saw a different icon besides Jack. Now, the Caretaker's name is also Dr. Albert Kane, and he was kind of, once again, a last-minute replacement. The original character for Halloween Horror Nights 12 was supposed to be Cindy Kane. Now, she was scrapped at the last minute because she, during that year, there was a string of child abductions at the time, and they felt that it was in poor taste, so they replaced him by the Caretaker. Originally, the Caretaker was supposed to be Cindy's dad, and then they kind of switched it around and later worked it in as that was his daughter, and she would make appearances later on as well, but she kind of became the second scrapped character that was forgotten about and then kind of in the lore that we're going to see it later on at different Halloween Horror Nights. Now, the Caretaker has a pair of shears as his weapon, and he oversees Shady Oaks Cemetery. Now, prior to working at the cemetery, Dr. Albert Kane was a surgeon and did experiments on people and would use his pair of shears to do these experiments on different innocent people, mostly while they were alive. And now he roams the cemeteries with his pair of shears, looking for his next person to experiment on. Moving on to Halloween Horror Nights 13, we got to see a new icon, the director. Now, the director creates horror films, but to create the horror films, he's actually doing real torture to make it look real. They did give him a little bit more of an elaborate backstory when they featured him over at Universal Hollywood, where he was apparently on the back lot making a movie, and then Universal had to kick him off because of what he was doing, and then he was seeking revenge. At Universal Orlando, he was out there looking for someone to star in his next film, and he'll make you a star by torturing you and recording it for his next film. Halloween Horror Nights 14 did not feature any icons. It was another year where they skipped over an icon and then instead focused more just on the houses and the scare zones and the shows going on, but no cohesive character to kind of tie it in. A lot of times the icon is more of a marketing tool. Sometimes we'll tie together all the stories. Sometimes just kind of be there for the different merchandise and kind of see. Personally, I love when they have an icon, but it doesn't need one to be a great event. It's always a great event. Halloween Horror Nights 15, they did introduce a new character, the Storyteller. Now, not really a big backstory with this character. However, she's creepy. She reads the stories, and she'll cut out your tongue. And you'll see her as a little old lady, usually in a rocking chair, reading the story and calling you in. And she's kind of creepy, but nothing as elaborate as the other backstories for the characters. That year also did kind of have a sub-icon, or a smaller one, called the Terror Queen, more of a queen of the forest that didn't speak, not really a main icon, featured on some of the merchandise and did make a reappearance later on. For Horror Nights 16, they called it the Sweet 16 Party, and they brought back a bunch of the characters, and this is the first time that they brought back a bunch of their characters to be the icons altogether. So this one featured Jack, the Caretaker, the Director, and the Storyteller, all coming to the Sweet 16 party. Halloween Horror Nights 17, we had Jack again, leader of the Carnival of Carnage, and he was the featured icon again for Halloween Horror Nights 17 by himself. Horror Nights 18 was kind of an interesting one because they brought in a character, however, a character that we kind of know of with lore. Now, this is Bloody Mary. She's based on the legend, so not really an original, and her theme that year was "Come into the mirror, my dear. This won't hurt a bit." This is a character that we saw for 18, however, really hasn't made an appearance again, as she's really more of one of the ones from a legend, not an original. However, they did go back to an original for Halloween Horror Nights 19, and this is the Usher. The theme this year ripped from the silver screen. He walks around and goes, "Shh," and then if you don't be quiet during a movie, he'll kill you with his flashlight. He had a costume on that is very similar to what looks like the Hollywood Tower of Terror costume, but he is a theater usher and walks around and is grim with his flashlight, asking you to be quiet. Halloween Horror Nights 20. Now, a lot of the icon years, they kind of try to take over those big numbers and do something big. And the icon that year was Fear. And he carried around a lantern with 2 X's on it because they usually use the Roman numerals. And this whole theme this year was 20 years of fear. Now, inside his lantern held all the icons, and this was supposed to tie everything together that he was in control the past 20 years. However, the storyline was never really made super clear. It's mostly a lot of stuff that you could just find online. It's not like you walk into the park and they explain the story. This is more of something that the fans have to look into. And his storyline was a little bit lacking, and a lot of people didn't understand it. When you look into the lore, it's pretty cool that this character, Fear, held 20 years of fear, and he was the one holding them all together, and does a little bit appear later with the lantern, and we hear more about it. However, a little bit of a lesser known of the Halloween Horror Nights icons. Now, Halloween Horror Nights 21, they went with the gambling theme and introduced a new character called Lady Luck with the theme, Your Luck Has Worn Out. Now, this character we didn't really see again too much, kind of more of just a creepy lady in front of a blackjack wheel. Nothing too crazy there. Halloween Horror Nights 22, if anyone remembers that event, was big on The Walking Dead, so no icon that year, or the 23rd one as well. They did The Walking Dead mainly around the park. Halloween Horror Nights 24, no big one, as they were saving up for the next year for the 25th, where they brought back Jack for 25 years of fear, and Jack had his own house this year. He also had a scare zone that featured all the other icons from the past, and then he also had a show with a new character called Chance, and Chance was his sidekick. Chance resembled, a lot of people would say, more of like a Harley Quinn kind of character, and they would feature his show of his Jack's Maniacs, where they would bring people up on stage during their circus and torture and kill them. Now, on his scare zones, he did have different stages with all the different icons, so this was the first time since the 16th that we got to see all the characters back together on there. However, Jack was the main icon featured this year. For Halloween Horror Nights 26, they did play up Chance, since she was a new character that we saw the year before, and she ran the event with the theme, You Don't Stand a Chance. Halloween Horror Nights 27, they featured an icon, however, it was never publicized as this was the main one. He was mostly just on the merchandise. Name was Bone, skeleton on stilts, never really big or official. It's hard to come off of these larger years of 25, and then you introduce a big character in 26, and they kind of went a little bit smaller with this one in 27. Halloween Horror Nights 28 and 29 did not feature a character or an icon once again. They seem to always save them for the big years. For 30, now 30 was supposed to take place in 2020 as the years always lined up. Unfortunately, they did have to push it back due to COVID, and it didn't take off until the following year. And that year, for the 30th, they did bring back Jack. However, they brought it back in a different way, and they did the Icons Captured House. Now, this was a Horror Nights house that featured all the icons from the past, and I mean all of them. Lady Luck was even in there. And now inside, this one would always have a different ending, and there would always be a different one that made it out and sits on the throne. So you would see them all in there. Unfortunately, this one was heavily with plexiglass, as it was still during COVID protocols. But all the different characters would be featured in the house somewhere, and at the end, you never knew who would be sitting in the throne that ruled them all, and it would change every time, which made it very fun. This year would also feature a scare zone called Eddie's Revenge, and we would finally see Eddie from 2001, the icon that never was, and he got his time in the spotlight, not as an icon, but as a scare zone character, having his own backstory lore. And for those who know, now that you know, and who he is as Jack's brother, the leader of the Chainsaw Gang, having his own scare zone finally. Halloween Horror Nights 31 featured a new character called the Pumpkin Lord. Now, the Pumpkin Lord was actually a character from the previous year. It was this house called Wicked Growth, and he was this giant demon that lived inside the pumpkin and would laugh. And he was featured right at the front of the event inside his pumpkin again, and it was this actor in this amazing costume, and he oversaw the event, and the whole theme was 31, so Halloween is on the 31st, and it was more of a Halloween is every day, so featured the Pumpkin Lord. Very cool theme, very cool year. Halloween Horror Nights 32, now I mentioned this one before, it was Dr. Oddfellow, and this to me was one of the best years they did where they really tied all the stories together. Now, Dr. Oddfellow, as mentioned earlier, Jack's boss from the circus, and this is where we got more of his backstory. We got to find out that he's immortal. Him and Jack had a fight. Jack tried to kill him. However, since he's immortal, he's been around forever. And all the scare zones around the park actually featured a Dr. Oddfellow. So we had one in the 70s, and we got to see him in the 70s. We got to see him when he finally got his amulet that made him immortal in the Central Park scare zone. So this really tied it all together and really brought everything together, plus a character that we heard about just in the lore of Jack since Halloween Horror Nights 10 paying off in Halloween Horror Nights 32. For Halloween Horror Nights 33, which was in 2004, they featured a duo pair of sisters that were the icon, named Sinister and Surreal. Each of them, the E's were turned to 3s for 33. And the idea was that one was about physical pain and the other one was about psychological torment. And all the scare zones around there would feature one or the two. They were supposed to say that they collected the screams for 33 years and that they were 33 collecting the screams, and then all the screams turned you into physical pain or caused you psychological torment. Very loose theme. They did have an archway at the entrance where they would welcome you. They were on microphones and would talk to you. However, they weren't as welcomed or as big as other ones in the past. They did try to do a lot of things with the colors and do pink for one of them, blue for the other one, show everything going on in the park, kind of tying it back. However, for some reason, the theme kind of fell a little flat this year and seemed a little bit more of a loose theme than in years of the past with these characters, and they weren't as accepted as other characters might have been, especially when you come off a big year from Dr. Oddfellow that really tied everything together. So a good attempt and always fun to see a new icon. However, one that just didn't really go as big, kind of like a Lady Luck character. Now, as of now, for Halloween Horror Nights 34, there is no icon, and I do wonder if they are holding off waiting for 35. As I mentioned, they kind of like those big anniversary years. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in 35. Are we going to get Jack again? Are we going to get all the characters coming back again? Or maybe somebody completely new? Only time will tell. Now, for the icons, you will notice that Jack the Clown has been one for 7 different times. We've seen the Caretaker 3 times, Director 3 times, Storyteller 3 times. Those are the main ones that you really see. And then you kind of have those other ones that kind of have popped in and out. So now we get to see what will happen. Over in Hollywood, the event did start, just to touch on that one a little bit, in 1986, so that is a longer running event. However, it is not as big, doesn't have as many houses or as much the lore. They typically don't do the icons. They have seen Jack the Clown and they have seen the director, but they typically go with more intellectual property characters. So they'll do Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Jigsaw from the Saw movies, Norman Bates from Psycho. They'll go more that route with their characters, less on the universal creative, bringing the lore together. Well, thanks for listening to our episode on the history of the icons of Halloween Horror Nights. I will see you in the fog. So if you're ready to have not the average vacation, be sure to reach out to our sponsor, KMV Travel, a travel agency that provides complimentary vacation planning assistance to families of all shapes and sizes to destinations including theme parks, most major cruise lines, all-inclusive destinations, and beyond. Start planning today at kmvtravel.com/Joe. Once again, that's kmvtravel.com/Joe. Link in the description box below. Thanks for taking a ride with Average Joe Orlando.
You made it!
I knew you would. Is everyone okay? Hope you still want to open an account.
Say cheese! See you later!
Thanks, everybody. You were brilliant.
At this time, gather up your personal belongings and take your small grubs by their grubby little hands as you exit. Thank you.